Thin Wood Walls, Chapter 5. 2 days later, on December 11th, 1941, Germany and Italy declared war on the United States. We had enemies across both oceans. How long would it take them to cross those wide blue highways? The week ended, finally. I got home from school, glad to be away from the cool looks and cold shoulders. Mom and Grandmother and I were sitting in our kitchen when the telephone rang. I answered it, hoping Ray had come up with a good way for us to spend the weekend. "Mrs. Hanada, please," a man's voice said. Please, but it was in order. He said our name like Canada instead of the way it was supposed to be pronounced, with a soft A and the emphasis in the middle. He made our name sound like the squeak of chalk on a blackboard. "Just a moment," I motioned Mom to the phone. "Hello," she nodded. "This is Mrs. Hanada." She listened for a minute, then took a pad of paper and a pencil from the counter and sat in a chair by the phone and began writing. Mike came in. We all stared at Mom. "He is okay," she said finally. She lifted her eyes and smiled at us. I breathed deep and let it out. "FBI?" Mike whispered. "A mistake," Grandmother said, but she looked unsure. "Not before then?" Mom said, nodding. "To where?" I tried to imagine the other half of her conversation. She shook her head, not smiling anymore. "May I speak to him?" More nodding. "I will be there, thank you." She hung up the phone and we went to her, bombarding her with so many questions that she raised her hands, pulled herself away, and said, "Enough!" She stood by the sink. We went to the table. She glanced at her notes. "He is in Seattle," she said, "and well, according to the man. I couldn't talk to him, but I can go to him on Monday." "How long will he be there?" Mike said. "Not long. A few weeks, maybe." I felt a weight lifting. A few weeks. Not too bad. "And then what?" Grandmother was frowning, as if she suspected something. Mom looked away. "They are going to send him somewhere else." The man wouldn't say where. "For how long?" I said. He wouldn't say. Grandmother sighed, deep. The mistake wasn't being erased. On Monday, while Mike and I were in school, Mrs. O'Brien drove Mom to a government building in South Seattle where they were holding Dad. When I last saw her that morning, she was scurrying around, packing him clothes, shoes, a razor, and other things. She looked nervous, but color bloomed in her cheeks. I wanted more than anything to go with her. By the time I got home that day, she was back. She and Grandmother were in the yard, pacing in the cold, talking. "How is he?" I said. She hugged me and smiled. Whiskered, thinner, but well. "Did he ask about me?" "All he spoke of was you and Michael and how much he missed you." My heart swelled until it felt heavy in my chest. "Not of his ancient mother?" Grandmother pretended to be hurt. Mom laughed. "He knows you are neither ancient nor easily offended, Mother." "What will they do with him?" I said. "He doesn't know. Everything is secret. A man stayed in the room with us. We weren't allowed to speak Japanese." "It was good to see him?" "Very good, Joseph." Her face was sad, but a smile crossed it. Bittersweet. I thought I knew what the word meant, but knowing what something meant wasn't the same as feeling it. When I saw the expression on Mom's face, I felt bittersweet. When I watched Grandmother cling to every sad, happy word from Mom's mouth, I felt bittersweet. Dad was alive. He was safe. But he should have been free, not under someone's thumb. I waited for Grandmother to say government or vermin, but as Mom patiently answered my questions, then Mike's a little later, the only sound from Grandmother was a down-in-the-throat sighing, a prayer for more sweet and less bitter. Christmas crept up on us, and as it got closer, I found new worries. Mom didn't drive. How would she be able to get our presents? How would she be able to buy the battery-powered toy telegraph that I'd asked for? And if I didn't get it, how would I practice my Morse code? What about Mike's BB gun? And how about our tree? I imagined it standing proudly on Mr. Spooner's land, Dad's handkerchief dangling from its outstretched branch, fluttering in the breeze as if it were waving to us, beckoning to us to come and take it home. Friday, December 19th, was our last day of school before Christmas vacation. It was also the day I had run out of patience. To ask about my presents would seem selfish, but I could ask about our tree. I found Mom in the kitchen with Grandmother when I got home from school. A letter had arrived from Dad. Grandmother was studying it. I looked over her shoulder at the messy piece of paper. There were 9 lines of writing. 4 of them had been inked over. "Who did this?" I said, trying to read what was left. "Thanks for the clothes and shaving kit. Miss you folks. Doing okay. Change in visiting days, and imagining what was blacked out." "Censors," Mom said. "They muzzle him," Grandmother said, "but his voice is still with us." "This doesn't tell us when he can come home," I said, "or even if." "He may not know," Grandmother said. "He may not know where he is going or when," Mom said. "But if he did try to tell us, the censors took care of it." "Do they think we'll ride our horses after his car and jump aboard like cowboys?" I said. "Maybe they have heard about Michael," Mom said, smiling, and Grandmother chuckled. I found myself grinning at an image of Mike galloping after an FBI car, whooping and hollering and waving his Winchester, or his BB gun. I decided to get back to what had been on my mind. "When can we get our Christmas tree?" I asked. Mom looked at Grandmother. Grandmother looked at Mom. "We may not be able to get your tree, Joseph," Mom said. "Not this year." "This year is when we need it," I said. "We don't have a way to get to Mr. Spooner's property," Mom said. "We can ask someone," I said. "The Llanos, the Hoshidas, the Nagasawas. They all said they would help." "They are all busy," Mom said, "and under much stress, and worried about being seen here. I do not want to ask them." "Ray's parents would drive us to the tree," I said. "I know they would." "Mrs. O'Brien has already driven me all the way to Seattle to see your father. She has promised to drive me again. I can't ask her for more." "We could walk," I said. "Me and Mike could walk there, cut it down, and carry it home. Ray could help." "Mike and I," she said, and I realized she wasn't volunteering to go. She was correcting my grammar. "Mike and I. It's more than 5 miles to that property," she said. "After 2 hours you would arrive there tired, and then you would have to drag the tree home along the shoulders of busy roads. That would take twice as long, and there would be nothing left of the tree." "We could," I started to say, "we could carry it," but she raised her hand and lowered her eyebrows. The hand and the frown stopped me. "It is too far, too hard, too dangerous." "You and Michael could walk to the river," Grandmother said. "There are small trees there for the cutting. I could walk with you. I could give you my opinion." I didn't want Grandmother's opinion. There were trees by the river, but they weren't my tree. "Maybe," I said. I took my books and went upstairs to my room. I thought about continuing my story, a Captain Midnight story I'd been working on before the bombs fell. But the story wasn't so important now, and the idea of getting me something I'd written on the radio someday seemed like a little kid pipe dream. I wrote in my journal of a good month gone by. The next day, Saturday, Mom got Mike and me out of bed at the first sign of rainy daylight. She wanted us to clean out and straighten up the root cellar to make room for all the stuff Mr. Spooner had given us. So after breakfast, we headed outside to the small, grassy hill that rose like a knob above the flat of the rest of our backyard. With Mike's help, Dad had tunneled into it and hollowed out a big enough space for shelves and walk-around room between the dirt of the floor and the low ceiling. We carried out Mr. Spooner's box to the rear of the mound and down 2 steps and opened up the big wooden door. Inside it smelled musty, like soil and things that grow under the soil, and it was cold. It seemed colder than the outside. Mike lit the lantern and set it on a shelf so we could see once we closed the door. I wasn't happy about starting my vacation like this. I could have been doing something fun with Ray, or listening to Let's Pretend on the radio, or curled up warm in my bed. Neither of us said much as we went to work, moving boxes, rearranging jars of preserves, brushing away spider webs and the dead insects trapped in them. I'd told Mike the night before about our tree, and he wasn't any happier about it than I was. When I'd mentioned Grandmother's idea about going to the river to cut one, he shook his head. "Flood-stunted tom-thumbs," he said. "Outside trees." He closed the door against the rain, blowing sideways now. I felt the dark close in, even with the lantern lit. I was glad Mike was with me. I wondered what it would be like to be trapped in here alone. "Do you think Dad's in a place like this?" I said. Mike leaned on his broom and looked at me. His eyes were dark holes in the weak, flickering light. "I bet Dad's place is warmer, Joe," he said, "and lighter, and bigger. But he can't open the door and go outside. He can't go home." I got a thick feeling in my throat. We kept working, cleaning up and making space. Suddenly, light flooded the little room. When I looked up, Mom stood at the open door, bareheaded in the rain, dark hair dancing around her face. A little smile tugged at the corners of her mouth, but she seemed to be tugging back. "You boys have a visitor," she said, and for an instant my heart stalled. I thought maybe she meant Dad, that he was home after all, and that she wanted us to see him for ourselves and be surprised. But in the next moment I knew it wasn't Dad. If it had been, Mom wouldn't have found it so easy to dim her smile. "Who is it?" Mike said, moving for the door. Maybe he'd shared my hope. "Follow me," she said, and we did, out into the blustery rain and through the back door. We took off our wet and dirty shoes and carried them to the front entryway, where Mr. Spooner stood, his rain-darkened cowboy hat in his hand. He looked like the Mr. Spooner I'd seen most often. Work boots, work coat, overalls, striped shirt buttoned high. Everything looked wet. He smiled. "Helping out your mom, are you boys?" "Joe's doing most of the work, Mr. Spooner," Mike said. "I'm doing the supervising." I shook my head. Mike had done twice as much as I had. "I doubt that, Mike," Mr. Spooner said. "I've seen you in the fields, remember?" Mike shrugged. "Anyway," Mr. Spooner said, "it's nice to see you earning your keep. I asked your mom to go and fetch you because I wanted to show you something." He opened the door and stepped outside. From the front porch he beckoned us to follow. Mike wedged on his shoes, but I slipped out ahead of him in my stocking feet. Instantly they were soaked and cold, but I barely noticed. There, leaning against the house, was a fir tree. A perfect fir tree. A white handkerchief hung from one branch. It was our tree come home. Not Dad, but something good. Something good. "Wow," Mike said, "I can't believe it." I couldn't believe it either. I couldn't help myself. I hugged Mr. Spooner and held on while he chuckled from so deep down his chest. I could feel it come all the way through his wet coat. He hugged me back, then let me ease away. "Thank you, Mr. Spooner," I said. "I thought we'd never see this tree again." "Thanks," Mike said, shaking Mr. Spooner's hand. "You're welcome, boys," Mr. Spooner said. "Glad to do it." "You're very kind," Mom said from just inside the door. Grandmother stood beside her, smiling and nodding at Mr. Spooner, but her smile seemed forced. I waited for her to say something about not getting to voice her opinion, but this time she held her tongue. She stepped outside where she could see the tree up close and eyed it, up and down. Her smile broadened. "It is a good tree," she said. "A wonderful tree," Mom said. Mr. Spooner put on his hat and pulled it low against the rain. I'd barely thought of the rain. He smiled one more time. "Merry Christmas, folks," he said, and started for his truck. We called Merry Christmas and more thanks to him as he walked away, then stood on our porch and waved as he drove off. Mike and I carried our tree to the backyard where it would rest until Christmas Eve. I studied the newspaper every day, even though the news, headlines that screamed of enemy planes over San Francisco, for instance, was often frightening. One day I waited for Mom and Grandmother to leave the kitchen, then picked up the paper, the Seattle Times. They'd been frowning and murmuring and shaking their heads over. I read the story. The manager of Seattle's Pike Place Market was planning on asking the FBI if he could fire all the Japs who had stalls there. I couldn't believe it. The guy wanted to sack everyone, U.S.-born citizens, or Nisei and their Issei parents. He even wanted to get rid of the Japanese-American farmers who supplied food to the merchants, which meant trouble for our family and for many others in the White River Valley, where much of the market's produce was grown by people of Japanese descent. Mom returned to the kitchen and found me glaring at the article. "The war has become an excuse for bigots to unwrap their prejudices," she said. "Where will we sell the crops from our farm?" I said. "How will we live?" "We don't know that this will happen, Joseph," she said. "If it does, we will find a way. We are the Hanadas. We are part of a larger family." The words didn't comfort me. I wanted her to say that this was all a mistake, that nothing would happen, that Dad would come home soon, and everything would return to the way it was. "We're Americans," I said. "Yes," she said, "we are. Try not to worry." I did try not to worry, but that seemed easier when I wasn't home. So whenever Ray invited me over, I went. His house was anxious, but my house felt empty. His house was still filled with his family. They faced the unknown together. Without Dad, we couldn't. I thought about him all the time. I tried not to say much around Ray, because I didn't want to complain, but a few days before Christmas, the rain stopped long enough for us to go out and shoot some baskets, and he asked about Dad. "We haven't heard anything new." Why do you think they took him? I remembered the reasons Mom had talked of, but they seemed too stupid to be true. I shrugged. Do you think they know something, Ray said? Something you don't know? He turned his back to me and swished a shot. I felt anger rise up, my face get hot. What do you mean? Maybe they had a reason? That's all I meant. My dad doesn't tell me everything. Their reasons are garbage, I said. My voice shook. You want to play some one-on-one? Sure, Ray said. He looked relieved that I wasn't mad. You take the first outs, I said. He took the ball back to our imaginary out-of-bounds line and dribbled it in. I attacked him like a swarm of wasps, darting in and chesting and shouldering and elbowing. I swiped at the ball, but it was only an excuse to knock into him. What are you doing, Joe? He backed me toward the basket. I crashed into him. Playing defense? I put a hand on his back. It left mud prints on his white undershirt. Protecting the ball with his body, he crouched and leaned and came up, shouldering into my chest. I lurched back. He launched a shot. It missed. We both went for the rebound. I got there first, but he had the height. He snared the ball, but that didn't stop me. I slammed into him, and the ball bounced free, and he let it go. I let it go. I charged into him. This time he was ready. He got his arms out and wrapped me up while I twisted and squirmed. What's wrong with you? He grunted. Garbage, I said. You're talking garbage. I freed an arm and swung at him and connected with the side of his head. I felt a surge of energy go through his body. He locked me up and wrestled me to the ground and rolled me on my back. That's enough, he said, working his way on top of me. He pinned my arms to the ground. Knock it off. I bucked and strained, picturing judo escapes, but he had me. You're just like them, I tried to breathe, but his weight was on my chest. Who? The FBI, the government. Just like them? You think my dad's a traitor, but suddenly I wondered. Was it Ray's words that had made me mad, or was it that some part of me believed maybe they were true? It's not like them, he said. I felt tears in my eyes, but I couldn't get my hands loose to wipe at them. They trickled, cool, down the sides of my face. I'm your friend, Joe. I just said the wrong thing. I'm sorry. Let me up, I said. He got off and helped me to my feet. He was muddy, head to toe. So was I. He wiped at his face and left a smear of mud on his nose. He looked like a clown. I smiled. He smiled. Morons, he said. The government is a bunch of morons. I miss him, I said. Christmas Eve arrived. It was different from other years, and not for the better. I want to stay in bed, I told Mike when he woke me that morning. The gloom of war and what it was doing to our country, our valley, our family, weighed down on me. Mike ripped away my covers. Let's make the best of it, Joe, he said. We did. After breakfast, we brought in the tree. It looked bigger in the house, taller and fuller. Dew glistened on its dark green branches. Its smell filled my nose. Grandmother spent much thought and time directing us around the living room with it, finding just the right spot. She'd finally gotten to exercise her Christmas tree opinion, and she was milking the chance as if it were an overripe cow. Mom carried in the box of decorations, then watched from the living room doorway, staying out of the decision-making, except for an occasional frown, a grin, a raised eyebrow. We ended our search for the perfect spot on a raised eyebrow, but Grandmother wasn't paying attention. Perfect, she said. Now for the trimmings. We decorated, taking our time, hanging a string of lights, paper chains Mike and I had made in school, ornaments, tinsel. Finally, Mike got up on a chair and clipped a silvery star to the tip of the tree. Plug in the lights, Joseph, Mom said. I got down on my knees and scooted behind the tree and found the plug. With one eye on the branches and one on the wall socket, I slowly inserted the prongs, half afraid the lights wouldn't work. And then what? No one in this room could fix them. The person who could fix them was locked away in a place where Christmas was just a wish. The lights came on, different colors and shapes, brightening the green and shadows. Everyone looked, oohing and eyeing, as I leaned back to admire our perfect tree. Then I unplugged the lights, imagining how they would look in the dark. I couldn't wait. I had always had trouble sleeping the night before Christmas. And this year was no different. But it wasn't excitement alone that kept me awake on this Christmas Eve. It was sadness about what had happened, worry about what was happening, fear of what was still to come. When I woke in the morning, I was mostly tired and lonesome for Dad. There were presents under the tree, and many of them were mine. I opened the small ones first, comic books, new jeans, candy bars, books, The Lone Ranger, and Dickens' A Christmas Carol. I saved the one bigger package for last, hoping. Mike opened his biggest present and let out a whoop. He had gotten his BB gun. My hopes rose. I ripped away the wrapping from mine, and there it was, my telegraph. I raced from the room, yelling out my thanks. I needed to call Ray. Mom had been going to see Dad on visiting days, but she wouldn't be going again. She learned that he was being moved, somewhere out of state, somewhere far away. On December 27th, a Saturday, we Hanadas put on our warm clothes and walked out to the nearest railroad crossing and waited. There was a rumor that the train carrying Dad and other men would be passing through our valley on its way to its destination. People walked past. Cars passed. A freight train rumbled by, cold and seeped into my bones. Finally, we heard a whistle in the distance. A train was coming. As it approached, I could see it was carrying passenger cars, and I got ready to wave. The engine roared past, then the cars. I raised my hand, but the shades were drawn, top to bottom. Bars covered the windows. I waved anyway, just in case Dad was peeking out through a slit somewhere. We watched the train disappear. We heard its noise die away. And then we walked home. Later that day, I heard a report that the government would soon ask Japanese-American families to surrender their radios, cameras, weapons, and anything else we could use to help Japan win the war. Grandmother, who barely knew how to tune in a station, smiled bitterly at the story. She shook her head at the idea of us magically transforming our radio into a device for spying, of committing treason. They see enemies where there are none, she said. She added some Japanese words. Mom laughed, then translated for Mike and me. Fear and ignorance give birth to absurdity. Mike picked up a spoon from the table and held it to his mouth like a microphone. Sneaky Mike Hanada, to Japanese spy ship, come in, he said through his nose. He made staticky sounds through his teeth. Come in, Japanese spy ship. More static. Please tell your aircraft carriers that it's okay to bomb us now. The chief of police is having his afternoon coffee and donut. His gun is holstered, and the town of Thomas is completely defenseless. I picked up another spoon. Sneakier Joe Hanada to Japanese spy ship. Do you read me? I made my voice rise and fall, the way the radio sometimes did. Smiling, Mom held an apple to her mouth. Japanese spy ship here. The Hanada boys have decided to become traitors and spy for a country we've never seen before. So come and attack us. And while you're here, may we please have an extra helping of bombs? None of us was happy, but we all managed to laugh. Even Grandmother. Foolishness, she said, her eyes sparkling. Our radio stayed in our living room.